Thank you so much. Thank you guys for coming out. I really appreciate everyone coming out today. What a beautiful day. It's great to be here in Cincinnati to meet with all of you wonderful people. While we're at it, can I get a round of applause for Brother Blondie and Kevin Kahn speaking here today. What a great, and also a round of applause for the volunteers and everyone who worked so hard to make this happen. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. I also want to thank all of you for taking your time out of your busy day to come down here. This is a great town. I love Cincinnati. I love it. And I'm not just saying that because I'm here. There's nothing more libertarian than looking at a big bowl of chili and saying, that needs spaghetti, and daring the entire rest of the country to do something about it. How many of you drove 100 miles to come here today? Wow. How many drove 200? Not so many. How many flew 700 plus miles away? Folks, as you know, I'm here today because I'm running alongside my running mate, Joe Jorgensen, for President and Vice President of the United States. I'm here because I want your support. We live in a place and time where the government, run for over a century by the Republicrats, has eroded away your rights and freedom. If you look past all the political theater where these powerful manipulators have taught us to hate each other, there is no substantial difference between Democrat and Republican politicians. Joe Jorgensen and I offer you a meaningful alternative to the monster that they've created and imposed on all of us. Joe and I want to restore your rights and freedom back to you. We're going to take the power out of the hands of the corrupt duopoly that makes decisions based on how they can benefit financially or by claiming more power from you, and place that power back where it belongs, in your hands. Let's think about it for a minute, folks. How many of you are tired of seeing your mothers and fathers and your brothers and fathers and your loved ones go off to war, go overseas to fight and kill them and possibly die on behalf of well-connected billionaire cronies and foreign dictators? I know I am. How many of you are tired of watching entire industries flee and all the jobs with them from our cities and our neighborhoods because of taxes and other terrible economic policies? I know that I am. How many of you are tired of seeing your friends and your neighbors and your families being locked away on the war on drugs and being given a criminal record? I know that I am. How many of you are tired of struggling to make ends meet because of bad inflation as a result of terrible economic policies? I know that I am. These are some of the many problems that you can count on Joe and I to fix just as soon as we get into the White House. Our opponents have no interest in fixing these problems. In fact, they're the ones who created these problems. And folks, I have to be honest with you here. I think they did it intentionally. I think that they put these policies in place in order to make you desperate and make you anxious and hopeless. They did it because if they can put you in that state, it makes it all that much easier to convince you that your lives will be easier if you simply hand over all control to them. I think it is absolutely intentional. Now let's talk about our opponents for a minute, shall we? On one hand, you've got Joe Biden. Joe Biden has been part and parcel of every bad bit of legislation and policy to come out of D.C. for the last 40 years. He was one of the architects of the 1994 crime bill, a piece of legislation that is responsible for putting more black men in chains for victimless crimes than actual chattel slavery did in America. That's the bar that Joe Biden has set. I wouldn't say that's something to be proud of. It's hard to fathom how he had time to do all of that when he devotes so much time to sniffing children and trying to make women kiss him in camera. And then, of course, there's Donald Trump. This very stable genius somehow managed to increase our national debt faster in 3 years than any single president before him. 3 years he did this. This is the guy who tear-gassed peaceful protesters in Lafayette Square Park so that he could trespass on private property to make a photo op with a Bible. What more could we expect from a lifelong crony who has used the power of government to harm those around him in order to enrich himself when he's not busy paying off porn stars to not go public about his affairs with them? We offer an alternative. We offer Jo Jorgensen. That's right. Jo Jorgensen, a brilliant self-made entrepreneur, someone who leaves no doubt about her cognitive abilities, unlike those other two. A woman who's ready to lead from day one, not to take control of your life, but to give you the control back, to put the power back in your hands where it always belongs, and to remove the barriers and burdens of big government so that you can thrive and prosper. Jo and I, and all of the other libertarians like Kevin, who are running up and down the ballot, are fighting to stop that Republicrat monster dead in its tracks. And we need your help. If you aren't already involved in the campaign, I invite you to go to Jo20, that's JO20.com, and sign up as a volunteer. While you're there, if you're in a position to do so, we would appreciate any donation that you can give. Those donations allow us to do these bus tours and go around the country and spread the message of liberty. And it allows us to do all the things that we need to do between now and November to do as well as we possibly can and to win back the White House for the people. I also want each one of you, if you haven't already, to go to lp.org and sign up as a member. Look around you. Most of these volunteers are from the Ohio Libertarian Party affiliate. Any one of them would be happy to talk to you about how to get signed up locally and be involved in this grassroots movement that we are building to set America free. We need you to get involved so that we can remind the corrupt politicians in D.C. that and the corrupt cronies who own them that their time is up. Remember to vote for Jo in November and put these thieving cowards on notice. We can do this because you are the power. Before we get started with the Q&A and closing, I want to thank each one of you for coming out today again. I really appreciate it. I also want to thank Young Americans for Liberty and the Heartbeat Movement and Kevin for their remarks and for participating today. Let's give all of them and all of these volunteers one last round of applause. And with that, I would be happy to answer your questions. And if people want to go over here and line up, we'll take the first 10 or so questions. If you don't make the cut, I'll be here till like 9, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. So if anyone has any questions, go up to the man with the microphone. Just if you can line up. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
So I don't know if you saw, but Trump today tweeted about boycotting Goodyear tires, and that is an Ohio headquartered company.
Oh, wow.
How do you feel about presidents putting boycotts on Ohio-owned and American-owned companies?
Well, I'll tell you something. I know I'm saying this in front of Ohioans here, and I don't care who I might offend by this. I am against that. No, let's be, so, can someone, what was that for? Why did he want to boycott? I assume for the pettiest of reasons?
Because they banned wearing political affiliated,
on their private property. On their private property. While they're working on their private property. So here's a president who, because a private company decided to set a policy on their private property, is calling for people to boycott a business that employs people right here in Ohio. This is who we have in the White House right now. All of that ends when Jo and I are in office. We're going to stop politicizing jobs. We're going to stop politicizing industry. We're going to allow people to work, and we're going to allow businesses to determine their own criteria, because it's none of the government's business, and it certainly isn't a politician's business what kind of criteria a company or an organization sets on their private property. Are there any other questions?
Hello, thanks for coming out here. My name's Bryce Phillips. I've actually been involved with the Green Party. I'm more socialist, but I do agree with a lot of libertarian values.
Okay.
So I guess my question would be about what do you say to like people that are not able to pay rent? I think we have very poor tenant rights in this country. who are being evicted, people aren't being able to make ends meet. And a lot of people are working. You got a lot of people that are unemployed, but also people that are working and are not able to make a decent living like people were able to do 2 or 3 or 4 generations ago. I'm curious, what does the Libertarian Party have to say at a moment when like our capitalist system is really in crisis?
Here's what government does to the working poor. And I'm actually taking this from Harry Brown, who ran in 1996 and 2000 as a Libertarian. Shout out to Harry Brown, all right? Harry Brown said, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, here's what government does to the working poor. They show up, they beat them up, they take their wallet, they take their bread, and they give them a few crumbs from the bread that they stole from them, and they take a few bucks out of their wallet and use it to buy a crutch for them and say, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have that bread, those crumbs of bread, and you wouldn't have that crutch. No, if it wasn't for you, I'd still have my entire loaf of bread, and I wouldn't need a crutch, and I'd have all my money as well. This is what government has done to the working poor. Like you said, 2-3 generations ago, it was not quite as difficult as it is now. And it is something that has been kind of slowly getting worse because of a combination of inflationary policies from the Federal Reserve and debt spending policies that have also contributed to inflation, as well as policies that have worked to make it increasingly difficult for people to thrive and to be able to work and to be able to find good jobs. All various regulations and barriers and burdens and taxes and mandates that have made it increasingly difficult for everyday Americans to thrive. We remove those barriers and burdens, and we remove those things that make the cost of housing artificially high because of imposed scarcity and because of inflationary policies in the mortgage market that cause housing prices to go up until they hit a bubble and then crash and leave those people with the holding the bag while the banks get huge bailouts, and so that their bottom line isn't affected. We end those policies, and the working class and the middle class are able to thrive again because government is out of their way. The idea, and I agree with the Green Party and with those on the left who recognize that there is a problem where those who have the most power are taking from us every single day through policies that they put through their bought and paid for politicians in DC and in state capitals and in city capitals. We recognize that. Where we disagree with many of those on the left is that we should double down on giving more centralized authority to those different politicians and the systems of power that they've set up in order to make things fairer. It is that idea of centralized power that has led to the inequities that we have as a result of that. We need to dismantle that and decentralize things, get rid of those barriers and burdens to allow people to climb out of the safety net instead of trying to make the safety net even more powerful and remove even more ladders. So I hope that answered your question.
Hi. One of the problems I have when explaining libertarianism to some of my friends is they always seem to have this response. Well, that's not realistic. Libertarians are idealists. You have to have some sort of government. How do I explain to them the concept of minimizing government versus having no government at all?
I mean, usually the best way to do that is to talk to them about the issues that they're facing and empathize with their situation and reflect back that you understand how they got there, and then show them typically how big government either created that problem or made it worse, or in some cases created that problem or made it worse. You can focus on things that they recognize are being created by government. And you can, so for example, if there's someone who is concerned about police brutality, or someone who is concerned about, out of control, the war on drugs, or, the school to prison complex or something like that, you can show how the same people who are in charge of that are also in charge of the things that they think government should be in charge of. So you can say, a politician who would lock you up for possessing a plant and destroy your life as a result, do you want that same politician to be the one to decide whether or not you get health care, or whether or not you get housing, or whether or not you be able to find a good job, or whether or not you be able to afford to pay for college? Because we've seen what those people in power have done when they've been given that power. They've made those things more difficult to get, they made those things more expensive, and giving them more power would make it worse. So I would say what is unrealistic is expecting these same two parties who have created the problems we're facing to suddenly this election cycle stop doing that and suddenly start doing the right thing, even though every indication shows they're going to continue doubling down on the bad policies that have allowed them to impose themselves upon us.
Spike, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah. So this is kind of a multi-question.
Okay.
There's a big problem in America of parents that have children that are adults that are drug addicts. And I know that you're a recovering addict yourself. The other problem that this causes is family law gets involved and takes kids from them. So what's kind of I know there's the algorithm of fixing it, it's got to be so complicated, but what are some things that you and Joe can do to help drug addicts and help parents that have addicted kids?
Well, ending the war on drugs is the single most powerful way to fight addiction. Let's be clear on something. If you are an addict of alcohol, there are there are exponentially more resources available because what you are addicted to is regulated but legal. If you are addicted to heroin, if you are someone who got hooked on opioids because Big Pharma wanted to make a fortune selling you opioids instead of dealing with the core of whatever your health problem is, and now you've reached whatever your quota is to be able to get those opioids legally, so now you have to rely on getting opioids on the streets, and eventually you realize that heroin's a lot cheaper, and now you're a heroin addict with a chronic pain issue. You are not going to be able to get the same kind of help that someone who has an alcohol problem or someone that has some other problem that is addiction to something that's legal is able to get. And so both you and anyone who would want to help you potentially is risking criminal penalties as a result of just trying to get help. That incentivizes people remaining addicts. It disincentivizes anyone trying to help them. By ending the war on drugs and taking addiction and treating it like what it is, which is a health issue instead of a criminal issue, that treats the problem at its core. Now, there's no policy that's going to end all addiction. There's no policy that's going to end all overdoses. And I wish that there were. But what it will do is greatly reduce it by dealing with the core of the problem, which is that government is stepping in, telling people they can't get the treatment that they need, and then criminalizing the addiction that they get as a result of it. So ending the war on drugs fixes that problem at its core, or at least greatly ameliorates the effects of it.
Could you explain in a little bit of depth your stance on defunding the police, and if it's for, where would you redistribute those funds?
Sure. So the federal government, there are many things the federal government should never have been involved with, and in fact, the Constitution clearly lays out that if something is not given as an explicitly enumerated right or enumerated power of the government to be involved in, of the federal government, that it should be left to the states or to the people. That's what the 10th Amendment says. Now, unfortunately, we have an out-of-control federal government that gets involved in everything. One of those things is the police. What have they done? Since the federal government got involved in policing, the police have become increasingly unaccountable and militarized, not just in their equipment. We focus so much on the part of there's something called the 1033 military surplus program. And we focus on the fact that you've got these small town cops that are driving around in mine-resistant personnel carriers and tanks, and they have armed drones and everything else. What we're not focusing on is what's arguably even worse than that, which is that they get military training from military contractors on how to use that equipment. They're not just handed that equipment. Military contractors come in and give them the same training that they give to our troops before they go overseas to fight military enemy combatants. So they give them this training, and then they unleash them in our neighborhoods. And any of us who is constantly being barraged with increasingly militarized equipment and training, it's going to change our mindset whether we like it or not. Then we have qualified immunity. Now, we hear a lot. Kevin and Brother Blondie and others are talking about ending qualified immunity. For those who don't know, let me give a brief primer on what qualified immunity is. Imagine if you could walk into a court and say, Your Honor, I know that I've been convicted of murder, or I've been accused of murder, but I think what I did was perfectly reasonable. And the judge goes, oh, okay, if you thought it was reasonable, then I'll throw the charges out. That's essentially qualified immunity. Qualified immunity says that if you are an abusive police officer or government agent, you can't be sued if what you think you did was reasonable. And guess what everyone who abuses people says to the courts they think is reasonable, whatever it is that they did. And so we have a situation like with Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd. Derek Chauvin had 17 other complaints against him. He had 17 other complaints against him, including wrongful death. He may have killed other people. He may have murdered other people. And the Minneapolis Police Department looked at Derek Chauvin and made the same cost-benefit analysis that police departments and government agencies make around the country when they encounter the bad apples in their bunch. They looked at Derek Chauvin and said, this officer is terrible, he's killing people, he's infringing on their rights, If we try to get rid of them, it's going to cost us a fortune. We're going to have to fight the police unions, and there's going to cost us a bunch of money, and there's no guarantee we'll be able to get rid of them. And if we keep them on the force, it doesn't cost us anything because of qualified immunity. We can't get sued, he can't get sued. So we just keep him on the force. He's probably eventually going to go too far and end up in jail, and then we can get rid of him. This disincentivizes good policing. It incentivizes bad policing. That is why we are so focused on ending qualified immunity, because it puts the power back in the hands of those communities and of the people that have been infringed upon to sue those officers and those departments when they infringe upon their rights. And what it also does is it makes those police departments and those government agencies, now when they encounter someone like Derek Chauvin, they say, we need to get rid of this guy because he's going to cost us a fortune. And the police unions also want to get rid of the abusive officers because they cost them a fortune. And it encourages good policing, where good police stop bad police, which unfortunately we don't see very often. We will see it when qualified immunity ends. So I hope that answers the question.
Mr. Cohen, how would you handle the stimulus situation, a situation that really shouldn't be up for a debate, like Congress and all them doing now? How else would you handle the unemployment situation?
Well, the way we would have handled, and thank you for that question. The way we would have handled that is by not stopping medical professionals from testing people for COVID-19 for the first 2 months that it was here. Let's be very clear for a second, because this gets lost in the debate very often. We hear about what more could government have done? What less could we have been allowed to do in order for us to be safe from the dreaded COVID-19? What we don't hear about is that for the first 6 to 8 weeks that COVID-19 was here, when patients went into their doctor's offices and said, "Doctor, I just got back from Wuhan, China, and I'm not feeling too hot, and I'm hearing about this coronavirus on TV, and I'm worried, I'd like to get tested," those doctors had to say, "We can't test you. The CDC hasn't given any of us approval to do so." That is why it ran so rampantly and out of control, is because for 2 months, there was effectively no ability to even test and track who had it, much less be able to contain them or anything else. And so, as a result of that, we thankfully had a handful of doctors who illegally tested people for COVID-19. And when they first went to the CDC with those results and said, "We have some positive cases, COVID-19 is here and we need to do something," the Center for Disease Control that the Republicans set up to protect us from disease, their response to that was to tell them, those doctors, to destroy those test results, to tell no one, including the patients, that they were sick, and to send them home. That is why it is as out of control here, and why this pandemic here is worse than it is in any other developed country. So libertarians would have never created the situation in the first place to lead to eventual lockdowns and to lead to all the unemployment and everything else, because we wouldn't have hampered the ability of medical professionals to do their job. Government agents don't save you from viruses. They don't treat a single patient. They don't test a single patient. What they do is they make it harder for the actual doctors and nurses and medical professionals who do it every day to do their jobs. So we would stop that at its beginning, so we wouldn't have this unemployment and this massive recession that we're in, and the lockdowns and everything else. We would have never stopped it to begin with.
Hello.
Hi.
Do you think it would be better to, when it comes to the financials, to create a counter economy or to try to fix the current one?
I don't see.
Would be more effective?
So when you say counter economics, you mean like agorism type of
Yes.
thing, or? I don't see a reason to differentiate between the two. This is like when people say, should we engage in counter economics or the electoral process? Yes. I think that whatever you feel best suited to do on an individual basis to deal with the reality that we live in and to combat it as best as you personally can is what you should do. And that's a matter of everything from your means to your comfort level to your social connections and everything else. So I don't think that there's a reason necessarily to choose agorism over changing the current system. I think that we change the current system, and I think that if you are in a situation where the current system is unbearable, then you have another choice to make there as well. So I don't really see a need to differentiate. My answer is yes. The standard political answer, yes.
Hey, I work in a business that does a lot of business with Asia,
Okay.
and we were extremely affected by the Pacific American Treaty that came through. As president, would you deschedule or reschedule the tariff?
So I would leave specific policies of that. I would defer to Joe on that. In general, our policy is that tariffs are a tax on consumers, in this case, American consumers, for buying the things that you find to be the best value and the most affordable. And all taxation is theft and should be ended.
There we go, right there. There it is.
There's the applause line.
Thank you, Spike. Actually, I have about a dozen questions, but I'll just pick one. You know, a while back, I read an article about the libertarians have for about 40 years said that the police unions should be kicked out of the AFL-CIO. And I never knew anything about that before, but I just wonder how you and Joe would handle that, or if that's something that you would consider in order to end the police brutality and such as that has gone on for several years, you know?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in terms of telling a private union, you know, you can't allow this union in your union as a part of your umbrella union, I doubt that, and I would defer to her on that, but I doubt that she would even think that that's a federally deemed power that the president should wield in the first place. But here's the thing. When you look at the question of police brutality, the police unions, and more importantly, the way that the police unions act when one of their members is abusive to one of us, is not the problem. It is a symptom of the problem. The problem is that the federal government has empowered police departments to become increasingly militarized and increasingly unaccountable. The way you deal with that is by ending qualified immunity, ending civil asset forfeiture, ending the war on drugs, ending mandatory minimum sentencing, ending no knock rates. You disempower and defund at the federal level the police departments and put the power of the decision making and money and who decides what your police look like back in the hands of you and your communities to decide what your police will look like. That, just ending qualified immunity, ends a lot of the problem with the police departments, with the police unions, and more importantly, how they deal with how they deal with when officers are abusive. You flip that around by ending qualified immunity. Now they have a vested financial interest in fighting and proactively trying to get rid of abusive officers instead of fighting to protect them, which is often what happens now. So that deals with that problem, and everything else fixes the problems related to police brutality. But in terms of telling a union that they, like I said, I would defer to Joe on this, but I doubt she would want to tell a union that they aren't allowed to be associated with another one. I think that we deal with the core problems by dealing with how government has empowered police departments and disempowered us in our communities to have more control of our police departments.
Hey, I think the biggest problem for libertarians now is exposure. And I think one of the barriers to overcome that exposure is getting into the debates. What is your libertarian plan to actually get on the debate stage to debate against Trump and Biden come September?
So, I agree with you. I think if we get Joe, when we get Joe on that debate stage, and she's between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, two men who, first of all, can barely form a coherent sentence between the two of them for a variety of reasons, but more importantly in our day-to-day lives, are part and parcel of every bad thing that has come out of Washington for the past several decades. Donald Trump as a lifelong crony and now as a politician, and Joe Biden as one of the architects of those bad policies for the past several decades. They are emblematic. They are uniquely emblematic of every bad thing to come out of Washington for the past, as long as they've been adults. And you put in between them Joe Jorgensen, who will be able to break down case by case and point by point how they have created this problem and their parties have created this problem, and how our common sense libertarian solutions are the solution to those problems. I think it's a no-brainer in that we win it. So to that end, in order to get that 15%, we need to get on the debate stage. We're engaging in viral media marketing on social media. We are engaging in this bus tour, which is, as I understand it, a first for libertarian candidates. We are going around at both the grassroots level and on the major media level and on the social media level. We are using a dragnet, leave no chips on the table approach to get in front of as many people as possible. You're absolutely right. Our problem's not our ideas. Our ideas are fantastic. Our only real issue, besides the ballot access laws and everything that the government and that the Republicans impose upon us to make it harder for us to even get in front of people, our biggest issue is just getting in front of more people, because the government doesn't want people to know about us, and the corporate crony media that's owned by like 6 companies, all of whom have a vested interest in keeping their gravy train going in DC, definitely have an interest in making sure that no one hears about us. So we have to subvert it. And that's where you guys come in. Again, join the Libertarian Party. Join your local affiliates. Get out there and talk with people every single day. What my message is going to be, going from here in Cincinnati all the way to Seattle, Washington, and all the cities I go in between, is that we are building a grassroots army for human liberty, fighting for a world set free in our time. And that is not a catchphrase. It is going to be you working on the grassroots level every single day, knocking on doors, making phone calls, writing letters to your editor, talking to your loved ones and colleagues and family and friends about why you're a libertarian and why you think they're probably a libertarian too. That is what's going to change it. And Joe and I, and those of us working on this campaign, on our end, are going to be blasting out on the bigger level with social media and major media marketing and this kind of stuff as well. That's the best way that we can do it. Thank you. And we'll take this last question, and if we didn't get to you, like I said, I'll be here for a little bit while longer. Just come up to me, I'd be happy to answer it just privately. Go ahead.
How do we break down the belief that a vote for the Libertarian candidate is a vote for Trump?
So, that's a great question. So, or a vote for Biden, because I've heard it. So when I go and I did petitioning in Pennsylvania, most people signed the petition. The ones who didn't said, "You're helping Joe Biden." And then the others would say, "You're helping Donald Trump." The easiest answer, if they're saying you're voting for Joe Jorgensen is a vote for Joe Biden and Donald Trump, you can say, if Joe Jorgensen wasn't on the ballot, I wouldn't vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. So it hasn't cost anything. What I can say when I am campaigning to take votes from Joe Biden and Donald Trump is I say, what don't you like about Donald Trump or Joe Biden, whoever they're worried that I'm helping throw the election for? And whatever they tell me, I can say, that's also true of Joe Biden, but that's also true of Donald Trump, whether it's policy or just how they conduct themselves or their behavior or whatever else. I'm able to say, you know that they're like that. And if they go, yeah, but then Donald Trump is like this, or Joe Biden's like this, I'll say, no, you're right, they both do suck, that's why I'm running. So, I mean, that's the best way to deal with that. Here's the other thing. There are some folks that until they see that we have are doing well enough in the polls that we have a chance of winning, they're not going to go from whichever side they think is the lesser evil. The people that we get initially are libertarians, people who are finding out that they're libertarians, people who have not voted, which in the last few elections, an average of 40 to 45% of Americans that are eligible to vote did not vote in presidential elections, the last few of them, because they don't think that any of them are a good option. Those are the people that we reach initially, because they're already sold on the idea that both those parties suck. We get enough of them in, and now the lesser evil people realize that we're the lesser evil. In fact, we're not even evil to begin with. So that's the best way to deal with that. Thank you. So again, I'll be out here mingling around.
Last question.
Okay.
Edward Snowden, first day in office, what do you do?
Pardon him. Woo! Or actually, I should say Joe Parkinson, because I'm not the president. So again, I will be out and about. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And folks, thanks again for coming out. This is the first stop of our bus tour. You are of my part of the bus tour. So you are the inaugural stop. I should have started by saying that. Like, if I seem rough, it's because this is my first time. No, so thank you for coming out. And I will be out here. I'd be happy to answer your questions. And again, you are the power. You're the ones making this happen. Thank you, folks. Thank you so much.